good evening again. Thank you all for joining us tonight's lecture, Ritual Bronzes Across the Seas, which invites us to reflect on the histories, movements, and meanings of Buddhist bronzes and works of art across Asia. Once again, we are very proud to partner with NUS Asia Research Institute to continue this important conversation. The first session was in 6 August, where we presented Xuanzang in History, Imagination and Art by Professor Tan Sen Sen, Max Deed, and Dorothy Wong. Held in conjunction with also the Nalanda Professorship in India-China Studies. Tonight, we are deeply honored to welcome back Professor Himanshu Prabha Ray as our speaker this evening. Professor Ray's scholarship has been pivotal in reshaping how we understand South and Southeast Asia through the lens of maritime networks and cultural exchanges. Her work reminds us that Buddhism, like many beliefs in Asia, traveled not only across land, but also along sea routes carried by merchants, monks, pilgrims, and artistic communities. We are also delighted to have Dr. Priya Jaradi as our moderator today. Priya's curatorial and academic research has also greatly contributed in rethinking how institutions shape art history. And it is also my great pleasure to welcome her back to ACM in this role. Also going back, Priya is my predecessor in a way, where we first started off as curators in the ACM. The subject of tonight's lecture resonates deeply with our ACM's mission. As many in the abstract, as you read, many Buddhist bronzes in museums collection, including our own, were also not found exclusively in archaeological sites. Some of them were collected in the 19th and early 20th centuries during a period where colonialism, colonial scholarships, and collecting practices heavily influenced how Asian civilization were framed and understood. Hence, it is very important for us to be here to continue this conversation, to examine these histories critically, is very much essential, and it allows us to ask how were these objects valued by the different communities, how their meanings were being interpreted or transformed, and how my museums today present them with greater care and what context. At the ACM, we remain committed to presenting Asian art and culture and presenting Asia not as a collection of isolated cultures, but as a region shaped by interconnected networks of exchange, devotion, and creativity. So tonight's conversation contributes meaningful to that ongoing work. Again, before we begin, I would like to express my appreciation to all our partners and colleagues and supporters who have continued to sustain these shared efforts to deepen understanding of Asia's cultural heritage. Once again, thank you all for being here, and it is now my pleasure to invite Priya on stage to introduce her. Professor Ray. Priya, please.
Clementon, Director, Asian Civilisations Museum. Associate Professor Tim Bunnell, Director, Asia Research Institute. Professor Himanshu Prabha Ray, speaker for this evening. Scholars, students, curators, docents, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Priya Jaradi, convener of the Art History Minor Program, which is a three-way partnership between the Department of History at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at NUS, the National Gallery Singapore, and the Singapore Art Museum. On behalf of the Asia Research Institute, a very good evening to all of you. Today, I have the great pleasure of bringing to you the second edition of the RE ACM lecture series, which is conceived in conjunction with the prestigious Nalanda Professorship for India-China Studies. Alongside its primary focus on India-China relations, this series also serves as a platform to reflect on other intra-Asian engagements which remain crucial to our understandings of Asia, both historical and contemporary. Since its establishment in 2001, RE has been committed to promoting Asia centered academic research through a strong team of full time scholars and equally robust networks of associates in Singapore and overseas. Located within the National University of Singapore, RE serves as a hub for scholarly encounters between Singapore, the region, and the world. Likewise, through its rich collections and masterfully curated permanent displays and special exhibitions, the ACM strives to present and connect our port city, i.e., Singapore, and its heritage with Asian and world cultures. Thus, abiding by both institutions' mutual interests, the REACM lecture series presents those scholars whose body of work has made a significant contribution to uncovering cross cultural conversations within and beyond Asia. Today's speaker is one such pioneering, prolific, and distinguished scholar. Professor Himanshu Prabha Ray is currently the Tagore National Fellow at the School of Arts and Aesthetics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. She has held numerous appointments and fellowships at prestigious global institutions such as the Institute of Advanced Study at Princeton, the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, the Humboldt Foundation, and many others, which are quite simply impossible to list or summarize here today. Professor Ray is widely acknowledged as a seminal scholar in the field of maritime history and archaeology of the Indian Ocean and the archaeology of religion in Asia. She has not only worked at the intersections of maritime archaeology, history, and culture, but also art and architectural histories, heritage, and museum studies. Her scholarship has offered a raft of theories, methods, and concepts for numerous scholars, curators, and educators working in the field of Asian studies, broadly conceived. Through today's talk, Professor Ray will trace the maritime journeys of bronze objects between South and Southeast Asia, including a selection from the ACM's collections. In attempting to approach these objects from diverse perspectives, Professor Ray will not only examine the historic trade networks, maritime trade networks that enabled their production and circulation, but she will also shed light on the colonial paradigms of collecting that ultimately brought these objects into contemporary museum collections, such as that of the ACM. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Himanshu Prabha Ray.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really honored to be back in Singapore. It's always a pleasure. And I have been welcomed many times at RE, at ACM. And so it is really my pleasure and an honor to be speaking to you today on a subject which draws both on my ongoing research, and my ongoing research as a Tagore Fellow is on ritual Buddhist bronzes, essentially bronzes from South India, because everybody knows about Hindu bronzes from South India, and everybody, including the Madras Museum, has a large collection of these. But Buddhist bronzes from South India are far fewer. So it's really that which is the focus of my research. And in order to study the background of these South Indian bronzes, I have then taken on bronzes from other contemporary Buddhist sites like Nalanda, Bihar, and many others. So this lecture and this presentation is in a way ongoing research, and I'm really thankful and really honored that I'm presenting it here, where I look forward to feedback. My other interest, which sort of really comes together as I present this lecture is in seeing museum spaces as spaces for public history or for the presentation of public history. And I am aware, I've just chosen examples from ACM, but these could be from any museum, because I'm very well aware, including from India, that what academics research and what academics present, it's a challenge that museum professionals face to make this amenable and accessible to a larger audience. So that's my second interest, which comes through in this lecture as I present it, and especially since, as Priya said in her generous introduction, a lot of the collections were made in the 19th and 20th centuries, and so the context has changed. And to be able to bring this context to a larger public is indeed a difficult task. So it is with that background, and it is with that work that I talk about ritual Buddhist bronzes. I'd like to limit this to Buddhist bronzes because, bronzes, ritual bronzes are far too many to be presented in this presentation. Some of the bronzes from the ACM collection, which I am using, there's a third, and I'll show you these bronzes as I go along, but just to give you an overview of the range and the bronzes that I've chosen, I start with the reliquary, the Gandharan reliquary in the dated 3rd, 4th century, which is upstairs. I think it's still there in the Gandharan collection. Then I look at some of the small and medium-sized bronzes, which largely come from Southeast Asia, from Angkor Borai, Bujang Valley, in Malaysia, Yunnan, Java, and Indonesia. Java in Indonesia, sorry. There is a 9th century Lokeshwar, which is again in the Faith Gallery, I think, which is an image from Vietnam. And the 13th century, the Buddhist bronze from Nagapattinam used to be here, but I think now has shifted to the Heritage Center. And that's a very beautiful bronze indeed. So so as you can see, it's a mix. I'm not sort of really looking so-called Indian bronzes, but I'm really looking at Buddhist bronzes, wherever they are made. And that's the point I'm making, that I'm not tracing associations, links, directionality, but I'm looking at why were these Buddhist bronzes made? Because the first part, ritual and Buddhism, those two are difficult words to bring together, because it was always believed that Buddhism came up as anti-ritual. It did not believe in ritual, and that it was this Protestant view of Buddhism that we've all come to read about and accept. So how does ritual fit in here? Several scholars have argued that these bronzes were really made by lay devotees, so it was not really linked to ritual, but these were lay donors. So there are a lot of questions. People have written about it, and I'd like to present how I see it rather than go with what's already been written. But before I go there, another point that I want to make, and this point is important, we generally see religion as being pan-Indian, Buddhism is pan-Indian, and seem to suggest a certain homogeneity as it spread across India. That is completely untrue. There's a lot of dynamism in the Buddhist landscape as it comes up. The Buddha was born, and I think these dates are important because they indicate shifts, which we don't often recognize as we talk about Buddhist art or Buddhist history. The Buddha was born in the 6th, 5th centuries BCE in Lumbini, Nepal, and his bones are enshrined, his ashes are enshrined at Piprava, Kapilavastu, which is India. There's the sites, the archaeological sites come up later. We don't have very many, or we don't have contemporary sites which are contemporary to the life of the Buddha. The stoops, the other sites, the monasteries, they come up by the 3rd, 2nd centuries BCE. Then there are sites, that's another story, I don't have time to go over that, but there are sites in North India, which my arrow shows on that map, which are sites which are linked to the life of the Buddha, Bodh Gaya, Sarnath, um, where he preached his first sermon, where he meditated, and some other sites. And what is interesting about these sites is that the Mauryan king Ashok, his pillars are there. So um, the pillars are set to indicate the sites associated with the life of the Buddha. There's a big story there. I'm not going there. What are under-researched are the maritime links. Now, if you see the west coast and the east coast of India, several Buddhist sites, and you can see the arrows which are indicating these sites, they are on the sea coast. So if Buddhism was inward looking, if it had nothing to do with ritual, if it had nothing to do with, with going across, why on earth have these sites, right on the sea coast? Some of them are very beautifully located. In Andhra, for example, overlooking the bay, Totlakunda, Bavikunda, and all of those. So there's a clear maritime orientation of Buddhist sites. By the 5th, 6th centuries, it spreads to the Himalayan foothills. And if you can see on that map, the red dots up in the hills. But more importantly, which are never talked about, are the southern sites. By the 7th, 8th century, South India, largely Tamil Nadu, Madurai, that area, becomes a center of the Buddhist sacred geography. So in a way, it shifts from what we were looking at, sites associated with the life of the Buddha, where the Buddha was born, maritime orientation, to sites now in Tamil Nadu. And Nagapattinam is a very important site, which I have great interest in. But also what is very important is the 16th century, where pilgrimage was still happening. And we have inscriptions from Burma, which talk about pilgrimage from Sri Lanka through the Tamil coast to Burma, to Myanmar. So the point that I'm making is that there's a lot of dynamism inbuilt in these sites. We don't often recognize it, we don't often accept it, because we just seem to think that, oh, Buddhism, India, all of it. It's not like that. Second point, what was worshipped? Why did the stoops come up? We know what a stoop looks like, but why did it come up? It came up because the stoops enshrined the relics. The Buddha was cremated after he passed away. He was cremated, he was not buried. The ashes and the bones were collected, and these bones were then enshrined in stoops, and they were not just put like that. They had to be put in reliquaries, relic caskets. There was a big ceremony, a lot of ritual. The donors, the devotees gave a lot of gifts, gold, precious stones, pearls, you name it, they were all there. And then the stoop was built. So what was sacred? Sacred was the stoop. Why was it sacred? Because it enshrined the relics and the ashes of the Buddha. And when monks and nuns traveled, they carried the relics. And they built stoops wherever they went. And in large parts of Southeast Asia and elsewhere, Central Asia, they carried these. Now, the highlighted part, which is that these reliquaries and relics, once enshrined, were enshrined forever. So if it's enshrined in a stoop, how do you see it? You don't see it. It's the stoop which is symbolic of the Buddha, of the presence of the Buddha. It's the stoop which is symbolic and is revered and worshipped, because the relics are not to be seen. But today we have relics and reliquaries in museums. Now, how did that happen? That is where 19th century, 19th, 20th century colonial archaeology comes in. I'll try to sort of shorten it, because otherwise I'll only be speaking on that. So let me go to the first object from the ACM, from the Gandharan Gallery. You see on the left-hand side, the reliquary. Something which I want you to notice is the multiple chhatras, the multiple umbrellas that this reliquary has. And these multiple umbrellas come up again and again, and I will show you in subsequent slides. Now, this is 3rd, 4th century reliquary in the form of a stoop. It is from Gandhar in bronze with gold, and there are gold and silver relic caskets, which I said, they were nested inside. So there's not, you don't just get bone and ash, but you get the whole sort of apparatus, as it were, of honor, reverence, which was then enshrined in the stoops. And you see these on the far side. So they had bone fragments, but also had gold ornaments, beads, pearls often. Now, how did they sort of appear from the stoops? They were supposed to be inside the stoops. This then starts with 19th century archaeology and the search for the relics. And one of the earliest excavations was 1830. This excavation was at a site called Manikyala, which is in Pakistan now, Rawalpindi. And it was done not by an archaeologist, it was done by a military official, a French military official, Jean-Baptiste Ventura, who was brought in by Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the ruler of Punjab, to train his forces. So he was really a military official. And he was looking for not Buddhism, but for the Greeks, for Alexander, because the classics is what people are trained in. I mean, you're trained in whatever you see your past as. So he dug a shaft through the center of the stoop at Manikyal. I'll just show you in the next slide what emerged. But one of the important objects that he brought to light, and again, there's much fewer discussion on the coins, are these coins, the Kushan coins. And you see the Buddha image on the other side and the Greek legend, Bodo. These are coins of the Kushans. I mean, this is a gold coin, but what Ventura found was really copper coins. But now there's a whole series of coins which we know, which had the Buddha image on them. And this is a cross-section of the Manikyal stoop. This is work done by Elizabeth Errington at the British Museum, because a lot of the data from the Manikyal stoop it landed up in the British Museum. And you see the relic deposit. You see the center, the cross-section, and then you see on the sides the reliquaries, the coins, the ornaments, all of which were enshrined in this stoop and deep inside the stoop, right? So this is one of the ways in which 19th century archaeology brought all these reliquaries, and especially these stoop-shaped reliquaries, out from buried deep inside the stupas to the museums and to public display. The second point, which I've sort of already hinted at, I told you to pay attention to those multiple chatras. Now you see this multiple chatra model of the reliquary continues well into the 12th, 13th century. On the top of your screen, there's the 11th, 12th century bronze reliquary from Nagapattinam. And you see a hole at the top. This was where relics are placed, and then the chatra covers that, and then it is enshrined. So this sort of multiple chatra model is something which has continued to be included or in reliquary models and has continued to be used. Now, what then happens is how do we compare at these relics, which I've just talked about, with images? Did the images replace the relics? Were the relics and images both in worship? And if so, why? And what do the images then signify? So is there a change in the way in which sacrality is shaped in Buddhism? Yes and no. So firstly, the images appear as early as the 1st, 2nd centuries CE in the area of Gandhar, and we do know of the Ashmolean Museum has many small Buddhist bronze Buddha images from the Gandharan region. So the images and the relics appear at the same time. That's point number one. Point number two is that huge, and I'll show you in a moment, huge images of the Buddha started being made by the 6th, 7th centuries, and these were in worship. We do know that. And there are Nepalese, contemporary Nepalese examples which show us that these huge, large size images were in worship. And one of these is the Sultanganj Buddha, which I'll show you in a moment. But surely what does happen is between the 6th and the 14th century, there are medium and small images, largely of the Buddha, and a few Buddhist deities, not all, and we'll come to that in a moment. But please bear in mind the Buddha. And this is linked by scholars to transformations in Buddhist philosophy. And they argue that these images appear because by the 6th century, the Buddha is seen as one of the residents in a monastery. So like the other monks who are living there, the Buddha is also a resident. He has a special cell, which is the Gandhakuti. And these bronze images really reflect the presence of the Buddha. And many of them are then given ritual burials, these bronze images. So the first point is, which is well taken, a transformation as revealed by the Buddhist text, by the Buddhist philosophy, and changes in a Buddhist, in the way in which Buddhism perceives the Buddha by the 6th century onwards. Now, the second point following from there, and this goes back to my dynamism model that I showed you earlier, does that happen all over? Are all Buddhist monasteries between 6th and 14th then, are they following the same model? So this is something which we should think about. Are they or are they not? And what do my bronzes show? So I'm going to come to that as well. But let me just show you this enormous image, which came out as a result of the laying of the railway lines. And you can see the size. There was Mr. Harris, the railway engineer, and this image is made of copper. It is lost wax, and they have dated the image as well based on what survives inside the hollow. And it's dated to 500 to 700 CE. It is now in the museum in Birmingham. And it was taken by Mr. Harris and by others at that time because it was interesting for them to see how copper was used, the craft. So we're looking not at worship reverence, but we're looking at the craft of making these giant-sized Buddha images. But today, the museum itself, Birmingham, whatever the reason why it was taken, today the museum has changed. And this is what I meant when I said that, how do museum professionals handle this challenge? So the museum has set up a faith room where people are allowed to worship this enormous life-size Buddha image. So based on the requirements of the community, the museum has changed its display in a certain way from just showing it as part of the craft tradition of India to allowing people to worship it in the museum. This is another image, and these are the larger image. When I said proliferation of medium and small-sized images, this is a 20 cm bronze Buddha image. It's again in the ACM collection, 9th, 10th century. This comes from an excavation, 36, 37 archaeological excavation in the Bujang Valley. And there's a debate where it was made, but that's of no interest to me. Bujang Valley certainly has settlement which continued for a very long time, from the 3rd to the 14th centuries. And what is interesting, it has both Hindu temples and Buddhist stupas. But both these kind of shrines, they have consecration deposits. And we're not quite sure whether this image came from a consecration deposit, because 36, 37, the archaeological excavation, was not very precise on those accounts. I mean, today people are asking a different set of questions. But what is interesting is that the Bujang Valley has also yielded this stone, which has an inscription. This was found, this is today in the Indian Museum in Kolkata. And you see those multiple chhatras, which I had mentioned earlier, which you saw on the reliquary in ACM and also in many of the other reliquaries. And this was set up by a master mariner on the successful completion of his voyage. So, you know, did he carry relics with him, and did he make this stoop? But nevertheless, the Bujang Valley has thrown up very many interesting objects for our discussion. Also important are the shipwreck sites. Now we have Southeast Asia, and it's really a sort of pleasure to say that Southeast Asia has thrown up almost 100 shipwreck sites, which have yielded a large amount of data. And you have already in your museum itself one of the Tang shipwrecks. But this is the 10th century Intan shipwreck, which was found in Indonesia, in Indonesian waters, off the coast of Sumatra. But what it carried were the bronze figurines. But you see that stoop, which we have seen earlier in the reliquaries. The shipwreck also had 9th century standing bronze Buddha images and other bronze objects. And we see a wide distribution of many of these bronze figurines. I think this is no longer in the ACM, if I'm not mistaken, but this was earlier. It was borrowed on loan from Leiden. And, so this is, but I think the 1874 Buddha is still there, the gold Buddha. But certainly it shows you the imagery that was produced. Now let me shift focus from Southeast Asia to India, and to two sites which are not very far apart from each other, Nalanda and Kurkihar. They're about 65 kilometers, which is not very much. They are part of the larger Nalanda sacred geography. But there's a lot of differences between the two. Nalanda is a World Heritage Site. It was excavated, I'll show you. And what they got were monasteries and also temples. Kurkihar has not been excavated, so it's a village. But both sites, Nalanda and Kurkihar, have yielded bronzes. Nalanda, from the archaeological excavations, Nalanda has a large collection of 553 bronzes, which are in different museums, but there's also a Nalanda Archaeological Museum at the site. And, then that brings in the whole, the other typology of archaeological museum and what that does, but that's a different story. Kurkihar bronzes are distributed, and particularly in Bihar and in Patna. So on the left, you see the Nalanda. This is 1861-62 map of Nalanda. The reason why I put it up is that the Cunningham's map shows that Nalanda is much larger than what you see today. Today, the World Heritage Site is, sort of just within the precincts of what the ASI managed to buy. I mean, the land that it managed to buy. But the site itself is much larger. It was surrounded by ponds and tanks and also by many villages. Today, what you see is what you see at the bottom, the monastic cells and the temples. The reason why this is important for my purposes is that in Monastery 1 is where there is a large collection of Buddha images. This is one of the images. Now it's in the Indian Museum, Kolkata. And a lot of the images were collected from Monastery 1, but also what was collected from Monastery 1 are copper plates, which are inscriptions written on copper plates. And one of the important inscriptions says that the king of the area, Devapala Deva, he donated 5 villages for the upkeep of the monastery, and this was at the request of an emissary sent by Balaputra Deva of the Shailendra dynasty, who ruled over Sumatra. So he sent an emissary and said, you should do this, and the king actually did that. But it is, I'm not sure how to explain this, why it should be only in Monastery 1, but Monastery 1 is the largest monastery at the site. It was rebuilt 9 times, which means that it continued over a long period of time, and it has yielded all these interesting pieces of information also about the connection with Sumatra. Nalanda has also yielded a metalworking site. This is near the Chaitya 13. And the reason why this is important, you remember that I had said who was making these bronze images? Since Buddhism didn't believe in rituals, so were the lay donors making it? Were they made outside by craftsmen? No, you actually have metal smelting furnaces inside a monastery or inside the precincts of a heritage site. So clearly, the monks and nuns were involved in this. And why should monks and nuns be involved if they are to be gifted away? The second point, which I would also like to raise here, is that we often see these categorizations which are made between Mahayana, Hinayan, Vajrayana, and so on. But if you actually look at the number of deities, at Nalanda, of the 233 bronze images, a large majority are of the Buddha. And then you have the Bodhisattvas, Avalokiteshwar and Tara. And the same is the case at Kurkihar. A new form of the Buddha emerges at this time, and he is the crowned Buddha. We do know that the crowned Buddha, that means one who wears jewels, one who wears a crown, and these are very beautiful images, a lot of them from Kurkihar in the new Bihar Museum, and they've been moved from the Patna Museum to Bihar. But a lot of these images are really, they come from Kurkihar and are aesthetically to be admired. Another difference between Kurkihar and Nalanda, and remember they're only 65 kilometers away, is that we have inscriptions which talk of monks and nuns coming all the way from Kanchipuram. And Kanchipuram is 2,000 kilometers away, south of Kurkihar. They come to Kurkihar and they donate these images at the Gandhakuti at Kurkihar, not at Nalanda, right? So if one were to take, for example, this standing image, this is a 6th century image, which was donated by, it's now in the Cleveland Museum, and it was donated by a nun from Nepal. And the provenance is not known, and that's a problem with many such images. But it is said to have been made in Nalanda. So there's movement and mobility of both monks carrying these images and donating, but traveling very long distances, between Kanchipuram and Kurkihar. Also between Nalanda and Lhasa in Tibet. This is again an image which is today in Lhasa. It was made in Nalanda, and it's a 10th century crowned Buddha. It's in brass, inlaid with silver and copper, and it has an inscription in Chinese which says that it was made by a dharma master. And remember, I have said that, clearly these were being made by monks and nuns. And he got it made in Nalanda and then donated this image. Then in addition is the Raffles collection. And there was an exhibition, I think in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, in ACM. 2019, sorry, okay. 2019, the Raffles collection. And this image was on display at that time with a lot of other images. And it's interesting that Raffles collected a lot of these small images from the Javanese, who valued them as heirlooms. But he believed that there was no connection between Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism. So clearly, they were of no interest to the Javanese. So the point that I had made earlier about the value of objects to the communities and as they move on. These, when they were found, these small images, the Dutch art historians labeled them as Indo-Javanese, and saw connections between Nalanda and Java. But of interest to me, and particularly this point that I raised between relics and images, is recent analysis which has been done of some of the images in the Gime. And this analysis clearly shows the images were solid cast, but the pedestals were empty. There was nothing in the pedestals, and that the pedestals were used for consecration deposits, which you see in the two photos. The one on the right is an X-ray of the bronze image, which shows the fact that the pedestal was hollow and it contained consecration deposits. And this is again from the ACM, which is a 10th century Avalokiteshvara from Yunnan. And it's said to represent an Indian monk, if the legend is to be believed. Finally, the Nagapattinam images, and then I will close. And these images are particularly important. They come from Nagapattinam, which is a district rich in fishing resources in Tamil Nadu. And Tamil Nadu is known for its Hindu temples, its very beautiful Hindu bronzes, Nataraja bronzes, and so on. So these bronzes, which come up in Nagapattinam, really raise a lot of questions. Nagapattinam is one of the sites. There are 127 Buddhist sites which have been plotted in Tamil Nadu in the period between 6th century and 16th century. There was a Buddhist temple at the site, which was used by mariners who sailed down the east coast as a marker for landing place. This was destroyed in 1856, but when it was destroyed, what it yielded was a large number of bronze images underneath it. Since then, many bronze images have been found in that area, in the district, Nagapattinam itself and the district of Nagapattinam. And almost 350 bronzes are known. Madras Museum still has the largest collection, but like I said, there are museums all over the world. And this is just to give you an example of the spread, the museums where these bronze images have gone to, from the Met to the V&A, and of course, the one on the left from Selur is still in the Madras Museum. The inscriptions from Nagapattinam clearly state that there was connections between this Chudamani Bihar with the Shailendra king of Srivijaya and also the Chinese emperor, who also gifted various objects to the temple at Nagapattinam. So the point I'm making, and this is the point I made in the beginning as well, that the circulation of these ritual objects, it's very hard to place them in national political boundaries today. What we need to really see is the way Buddhism spread, the way changes were made in its philosophy. Monks and nuns traveled, and they took what was relevant to them at that point in time. Now, today, if we are going to, plot territorial boundaries and say this is Indian and this is Chinese and this is Javanese and whatever else, then we get into all kinds of problems. And I think that is what has happened to this whole discussion on Srivijaya and, who conquered whom and so on. So I'd like to end by saying that the bronzes that I've shown you, they indicate hierarchies within Buddhist sites. And I said, remember, Nalanda, Kurkihar, only 65 kilometers apart, but one is not a reflection of the second. They're very different. So something is happening where there's a hierarchy. We don't know the ancient hierarchy because we've not excavated Kurkihar. The present hierarchy is Nalanda is a World Heritage Site, Kurkihar is a village. So which hierarchy overrides which hierarchy, all right? Second point, the images that are in the ACM collection clearly have, wider linkages. And I think that's where I greatly admire the museum professionals that have the hard task not only to make these not only to make these visible to their own audiences, but also audiences who visit from elsewhere. You know, this interconnectedness. And the third point, of course, is that these images which we admire today as as visions of artistic and aesthetic value were really ritual objects. Now, how do we sort of factor that in? I have no answers, but I would like to raise these questions. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Professor Ray. That was a very rich, multi-layered and informative talk. Um, so, as we've discussed, in the interest of time, I'm not going to summarize the talk. The idea is for us to have a small discussion and then perhaps to open the floor to questions. Right. So I understand, Professor Ray, as you said at the beginning, that this presentation actually comes from a larger research project where you're interested in Southern Indian bronzes. But to get started, you looked at bronzes from Nalanda and Kurkihar in particular, and broadly between the 6th to the 14th century AD. And the last point, you closed off this presentation by saying that a lot of these divine objects, when they appear in museums or when they're displayed in museums, we're focusing on the form or the aesthetic value, not so much on the context. But of course, your presentation did talk a lot about the context. So we have the sacred context of ritual, of worship, and then the 19th century context of 19th century archaeology, right? So a recollection of these objects. Now, I need to let the audience know that you were invited to curate the Buddhist art gallery at the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya, which for context is the former Prince of Wales Museum in Bombay, right? So I'm going to try and connect this presentation with your role as curator of that Buddhist art gallery. Now, how do you think museums can redress this imbalance between the elevation of form or the visual properties or aesthetics of an object vis-a-vis the contextual histories, which are somewhat underplayed? So, could you tell us what is it that you've done or the curatorial strategies that you've adopted at the Buddhist Art Gallery in Bombay to rectify this imbalance between form and context? Is there a way that museums can actually present the contextual histories in all their internal variations that you were trying to highlight?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'd like to answer it. I mean, I'm now specifically speaking of the collection of the Mumbai CSMVS. CSMVS is very fortunate because they have the entire Mirpur Khas. Mirpur Khas, to place it in context, is a site today in Pakistan, in Sindh. It was excavated by cousins by the Archaeological Survey of India pre-partition in the early 20th century. And it was excavated by Henry Cousins, who was also a trustee of the then Prince of Wales Museum. And what was very interesting about Kahujo Daro, the stoop, was that it was decorated with terracotta tiles, dated late Gandhar, 5th, 6th centuries, so not early Gandhar. Now, at one level, those tiles can be very boring because there are no narratives on that museum. There's only, images and more images of the Buddha. The only fascinating terracotta presentations from that site are the donors. There's some beautiful representations of the donors. So what CSMVS did, and since they had a large part of the collection, they did a sort of model of the stoop, and then they did a sort of digital presentation, which allowed the visitors to see where each of those tiles came from. Otherwise, if you look at the tiles, they're the most boring things, because how many terracotta tiles with Buddha images can you look at? So in this way, it was engaged. They engaged the visitor, and also put those tiles in context. So that was one. The second was, and this I had um, sort of different opinion, I would say, but Bodh Gaya today is the place of Buddhist ritual. So a documentary was made, and that plays that documentary in the museum gallery, where it shows how ritual was performed or is performed at a Buddhist site. Now that can, I think it's sort of collapses time if, and to my historian's mind, I think there are issues there which I don't easily get over. That, it shows a modern ritual and is assuming that it was the same in the ancient period. So, um, okay, but anyway, I think for the ordinary visitor, that there is ritual involved in Buddhism, it's a good strategy. But the third thing, which I had to fight the CSMBS, and I'm very proud of that, was they brought out a small guide, and in that there was a chapter on collectors and how the collection of CSMBS happened. Now, CSMBS curators were not happy, and they said, we've never done this, and we don't want to do it because we have so many donors, and some will be displeased. So anyway, I fought my way tooth and nail, and I said, no, but the CSMVS, and the reason why I wanted it in was that many of these objects were actually bought in the art market by the rich elite of Mumbai or Bombay then. They could have kept it, as their private collections, but they gifted it to a museum which represents the city. So I said, what better engagement than having these people who believed in your museum? Why don't you want their names in? So anyway, so I had my way, and we had this chapter on collectors. So I do think that these three strategies, to my mind, at least in my opinion, um, went some way to placing the objects in context.
I have questions about the first two strategies, the digital and the documentary, but just to speak to the guide, right? The guide which documents the collections from which these objects came. It reminds me of Professor Arjun Appadurai's advocacy for revealing the entire provenance of an object that appears in a museum. So, not just the original site of production, but also its recollection or resale on the market. So, what would you have to say to that? Because a lot of these objects are a result of 19th century archaeology or other modes of collecting. So, should that be revealed in these guides? Should all of that be documented? What are your thoughts?
I would certainly think that where possible, I don't think it's always possible, because they change so many hands that it's not always possible to do the documentation. But when they come from archaeological sites, I think it is possible. And I think when they come, and we have archaeological records, and we also have, what went to which museum and so on and so forth. So when they come from archaeological sites, um, I think for the visitor, um, and certainly, in my own interest as an academic, I think that goes a long way in contextualizing the object. But, like I said, it's not always easy. It's not an easy proposition. It's tough.
Sure. And coming to the previous two strategies, so you said there was a digital recreation of sorts in the gallery.
Yes.
And the documentary, which of course then raises these tensions between what are contemporary modes of veneration or worship vis-a-vis the original or the older formats, right? But the digital and the documentary actually reminds me of the ACM's pre-2015 revamp. So I was wondering if I could draw Clement into the discussion here. Um, just again for the benefit of other members of the audience, the ACM underwent a massive revamp in 2015, and pre-2015, the permanent displays, I remember, had a lot of audio-visual segments, which means that objects were interleaved, whether with the festive or the ceremonial or their religious lives. And of course, that's also because the display adopted a very place based or a context based approach vis a vis post 2015, where you're committed to a globally connected and a transcultural approach, which is wonderful, which is what you're proposing, and the discursive trend in global art histories is proposing, that we pay attention to circulations as opposed to looking at political boundaries or borders. But in terms of display, the post 2015 strategy also de emphasizes the deep context based telling, or de emphasizes the audiovisual segments. So my question to you, Clement, do you think there is a way to combine the pre 2015 and the post 2015 strategies or modes of display? Is there a way to strike a balance between a deeper context based telling of objects with a wider cross-cultural or transcultural approach? Is that even possible? I know it's a big question.
Oh, thanks, Priya, for the question. And I think the short answer for me is yes. How do we want to strike the balance? It's a tricky one, and there are pragmatic reasons to be concerned of. Space is one thing. I mean, ideally, what would be great for a museum like ACM to achieve is that we can do both, right? You have your historical, your geographical theme galleries, and then you have this luxury of space to have the cross-cultural connections to talk about the gray zones, as how Professor Ray kind of put it. And then that leads on to the other section. But unfortunately, with the current building limitation, it's quite difficult. And when you try to do both with the current space constraint, then it's also very much a touch and go methodology. And do we want to compromise for that or not? So the short answer is yes. I believe there are always rooms to be negotiated. And I also believe that every 10 years in a museum's life cycle, things changes. Theoretical discourses change, technology advances. 20 years ago, everything was done in a very, like you said, the talking heads, the videos. One would also argue in a way that what kind of context are you building when how deep, again, is also with that ties back with the provenance research. How much do you know about the objects? The danger is also to create the context for the sake of context, and then it creates a very fake context, which then what are you trying to represent or champion for the objects if you do not know much about it? So then it goes back to the research, which is very important, and it's always an ongoing process. And then 10 years ago, where we redid the galleries 2015, QR code is also not that much popular until COVID. And then now with QR code, I mean, then it goes back to your question, how do we layer the information and bring a lot of either the documentations or the interviews, the voices from the communities, how do we marry all this together? But ultimately, we also do not want to weigh down. I mean, museum fatigue is very real. And too much information, too much context. You want to talk about history, the context, the art historical approach, and then the cross-cultural link. I think is a lot to shoulder for the ordinary visitors. But how do we then tier it and make it very accessible that people and could pick it up? I guess it's an ongoing discussion with scholars, even with engineers and people who work in the tech world as well. How do we bring in all this and to have that conversation? I think that's the homework for museum professional these days.
Indeed. Thanks, Clement, for that very well-considered response, because we recognize that on the one hand, whereas there are these contextual histories, they have internal variations, they cannot be flattened, and then, of course, considerations of space and technology. So, indeed, yes.
Clement, if I may respond, and again, going by the CSMBS example, two issues. Getting students, uh, that is an uphill task. But I don't know, maybe here it's possible to, okay, to look at material culture and to work on that for their whatever, MA thesis, PhDs, whatever else they want to do. So you get the research, and you get somebody else to do that. And the other, which I was going to suggest, and which again is not easy, I mean, these are all uphill tasks, tying up with other museums and having joint exhibitions or something, which sort of frees you of, or any museum, because all museums have this problem with space. So these were the two things that I was just thinking off top of my head.
We are doing that, and I think I really like your second point about the partnerships with museum to co-build research. I think one thing has also changed quite significantly in the museum field is that less and less you see museums who have great collections wanting to take an exhibition wholesale, basically. I think more and more when we talk to my counterparts or colleagues, they say that what can we do to co-curate and to co-research together, so that you present the exhibition in, say, ACM, and then you bring the exhibition, so that there is that kind of reciprocity, that you share the narrative together, to work together. So that is changing as well.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Clement. Thank you, Professor Ray. Perhaps it's a good time to open the floor for questions. So we have the microphone coming around.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful discussion and for sharing your research, Professor. So I raised my hand first because I wanted to build on to what you were just discussing. To give a bit of context, I work as a curator at the Singapore Botanic Gardens. I manage exhibitions there. And I'm also a docent, so I wear both hats. So I thought this was an interesting point on how we struggle to bring these multiple narratives into exhibitions. So 2 points to that. I think one of the ways to think of it is that not to think of an exhibition as just being limited to objects and their labels. We can layer it with technology, of course, and bring in programming, bring in digital is wonderful, like you mentioned in your examples, Professor, through documentary, bringing in students, co-curating, co-creating. Also, I felt I've been a docent for the past 12 years now, 15 years almost. So I think docents play a very important role, and I know there are a lot of docents here today. So through our lived experiences, through our personal narratives, we can bring in all these contexts, which just an object in the museum is not able to say. So I think we can bring in all those layers. A very fine example of this, actually, I saw at the Manila Galleon exhibition, which was at the ACM. I think, Clement, you curated that one. And it was wonderful because it brought together many different things. It was a difficult history to talk about. You spoke about the history. There was a lot of contemporary context through the programming. And I think it was also very inclusive, is something which stuck in my mind because there were tactile displays, and which I saw for the first time. So I think that was a wonderful example of how a lot of context was built with just objects. And it was how a traveling exhibition was contextualized for ACM. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your input. And actually, we just had this little conversation prior to the lecture with the docents, with Professor Ray, and you did mention that the docents are a very important conduit to sort of take object research and these narratives. So an important conduit between the curatorial team, the displays, and the public. Would you want to comment on?
No, I agree, and I think in that sense, ACM is really, doing very well. And this doesn't always work in all the museums. So a big congratulations on that.
Yes, there's another question at the back, yeah.
Professor Ray, you've had such a long involvement with museums all over the world, in the West, in the East. To what extent have you seen changes in the way museums curate exhibitions or even put up their personal permanent displays? To what extent do you think governments have influenced this? Because we cannot escape the political climate or the missions of governments who fund the museums.
Thank you. I can only talk about India. I mean, I don't have enough expertise on anywhere else. And I would give you the example of, government funding is not always a good idea. The museums have to, no, the point is, the museums have to depend on it. But no, I've seen in the case of, say, CSMVS, and if one were to compare, say, the National Museum in Delhi and the CSMVS in Mumbai, CSMVS gets, it's not a central museum, it gets some funding from the state, right? And on a case-to-case basis from the government of India. But now it needs money. So where does it raise money? It raises money privately, right? Now, if you raise money privately, then those private donors come back and say, hello, where is my money? What did you do with it? So the museum has to make they have to sort of show something for it, right? I mean, they can't just take private money and, unlike government money, sorry. But, so I think that there is, pros and cons to both of them. And I mean, I do think there are reasons why people in the National Museum don't want to follow that, because if you don't take with government money, at least, okay, somebody tells you do this, you do that, okay, everybody's happy. But if you don't do it, there's nothing to happen at the end of it. But if you raise private money, then you're accountable. And, so I think you have to work very hard if you want to get out of that. And that's a sort of a challenge that the museum professionals really have to decide for themselves. I mean, should we go this way or that way? But I do see that it's possible. Maybe it's possible in Mumbai, but I do think it would be possible elsewhere as well. But then one has to deliver.
I think Madam Shaw's question is also asking if you accept government funds or money, then it influences the narrative so that museums have to then present a more national or a nationalist telling of sorts. Is that what you're alluding to?
I mean, I'm not going to ask Helen to comment.
No, I didn't mean. So therefore, we're not.
In countries as you go, it depends on
You can always find a way around. I mean, I think it's. I don't agree there that, you take government money and the government says, okay, do this. You can always do that, but do that in a way which has multiple meanings, So I think it's possible. But the point that I'm making is that then it's a lot more research and a lot harder. I mean, it's much easier, you just sort of label something Gupta dynasty or whatever dynasty and end of story. So
the bottom line is that whether whosoever's money you take, we come back to the idea of plural or multiple narratives, which then solves. Yes. Do we have more questions?
Professor Ray, have I want to come back to the Southeast Asian bronzes. It appears now that on Cambodian art market, there are very few samples, or there are few pieces that said to be collected from the villages. And they probably date just 20th century, but they echo very strongly the characteristics of what we can probably trace to, Buddhas which are found in, Malaysia or Indonesia. In your talk, you haven't covered any, like, coming from Cambodia. Is it still part of your research, or we just don't have enough information on these bronzes to research deeper?
Thanks. No, my research is largely on Indian bronzes because it's a lot to handle. If I do bronzes, first let me just sort of get a handle on the Indian bronzes, and then I move forward. And the larger question, actually, I was that I really wanted to raise and discuss was what role do these bronzes play in a museum display? Because we often it's the stone images and the larger images which get the attention. The bronzes are, they are small, and how many Buddhist bronzes, how many bronze images of the Buddha standing or sitting can you display? After all, there is the whole aesthetics of museum display as well. So I think there are larger issues involved here, and I have not really covered Cambodian I have looked at some Javanese bronzes, but largely from the point of view of ritual and of relics and images, and how do the two link, the relics and the images, rather than just looking at the bronzes per se. So I can only give half an answer. I'm sorry about that.
We have time for one last question from the floor. Dr. Sumit Mandal.
Thank you for your lecture. You spoke in a way that clearly moved away from ideas about the greater India, and in fact, that doesn't even have to be mentioned. You create your own sense of this world. I want to say connected, but actually my question turns on the issue of connectedness. You also very deliberately said, I'm not going to try to connect these things. And there's very little time left, so I won't tell you why I'm asking the question, but it means a lot to me in terms of my own work, which relates to Muslim shrines across the Indian Ocean. So the question I'm asking myself then with these scattered phenomena across time and space is, what is the history I'm trying to tell? So I'm going to ask you, and it may not be a fair question, but I know there's something that you're thinking about as you are presenting these ritual Buddhist bronzes, and you ask for feedback as well. So the question for me then is, what might be the history that you are telling? Thank you.
Yes, the history that I'm telling is really linked to my work on coastal shrines. And I'm making a distinction between the coast and the hinterland. Today, we don't make that distinction. The coast is part of the hinterland. But I do think in the past, and particularly in the pre-colonial period, or before our territories got defined, there was a clear distinction between the coast and the hinterland. The points that I raised in my book on the coastal shrines was the fact that what anchors this circulation, right? It's not I'm arguing against the polities, and I'm arguing against trade very clearly, So what I'm arguing for is networks that connect shrines. Now, clearly, you would argue that these shrines have to be in places where people come, and those places would where people offload or landing places, and they would also be at the mouth of rivers because those rivers connect inside. So there are a whole lot of other ways of looking at those shrines, but nevertheless accepting coastal shrines as anchorage. And if one accepts coastal shrines as anchorage, then what one has is shrines all the way from, one would say the Berenike, which is the west coast of the Red Sea, going all the way to China and further up. And in a way that would move us away from the interconnectedness, as you rightly argued, of objects to the anchorage, to changes in that anchorage, because that anchorage is not static. It's dynamic and it changes over time, both in terms of who's coming in and who's not. But the larger question that I'm, which also links to the kind of work that you do, is looking at not denominational religion, but at sacred space. And that sacred space could be shared, contested, whatever else. But do we accept it as sacred space? Or do we say, Hindu temple, Buddhist shrine, Jain temple, Muslim mosque, whatever? And that's where both continuity and discontinuities happen in that sacred space. And Nagapattinam is a good example. I mean, the Nagore shrine is just there. So I think that I'm, at least in my mind, I think this providing anchorage to these objects and these communities raises a whole set of other kinds of questions of space, but also of changes in coastal architecture, over time. And I see the change happening much more, not with the coming of Islam, but with the colonial period. And I think that, there are big, I don't study Islam, I don't know the languages. But there are big gaps in the way in which we have done this. So I don't know if this is convincing, but that's my response. Thank you for the question.
So, Professor Ray, for the benefit of all of us who want to follow up on your research on Southern Indian bronzes, when would that be published and where would it be published?
Oops, that's a tough one. But I have papers under review, and I think there's Serena Oterio and Percy Arfin. They are doing a book on liquid continents, is what it's called. It's already already under. I'm just thinking of the publisher. I think it's Springer. So I have a paper there. I'm also doing a paper for the British Museum. They are bringing out, they did this Silk Road exhibition. I'm sorry, that's a completely different topic, but I argue against the Silk Road. I don't want to start that now. But so I'm writing a paper for them on bronzes and the reason why I think the Silk Road is not a good way of looking at the Indian Ocean. So those two hopefully should be out next year if all goes well.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
We'll look out for those. And so on that note, if everyone could please join in thanking Professor Ray for that wonderful talk.
Just also on behalf of the museum, thank you, Professor Ray, for the wonderful session, and thank you, Priya, as well, for moderating. And once again, thanks to our partners, ARI, with Professor Tim Burnell, as well, and all the ARI staff for helping out, as well as ACM team as well for helping to bring this event to you. And I think that's it for this year, and we will look forward towards next year's edition on how we're going to come back with for the sessions. So thank you once again. Thank you everyone for staying true.